What's up guys? In today's video, I'm going to give you the ultimate guide to using lead tape on your pickleball paddle. If you've never used lead tape on your paddle before, you might be wondering, what's the point? Lead tape can help add power, control, prevent your paddle from twisting in your hand as much, and even make the sweet spot feel larger. Lead tape can completely transform a paddle you don't like into something you enjoy. For example, when I first received the Selkirk Labs Project 003, I thought it was an okay paddle, but not one that I would probably use. So I added quite a bit of lead tape, and it proceeded to be my favorite paddle for nearly 6 months. I would not overlook the benefits that lead tape can provide. So let's get right into it. What lead tape should you buy? There are a few things you should keep in mind when choosing lead tape for your paddle. First of all, as most of you probably know, lead can be toxic. So if you're worried about that or don't want to cover your lead with electrical tape, you can purchase tungsten tape instead, which is safe to touch. There aren't many tungsten tape options on the market, but Selkirk does sell some on their site. The pack is $10 and comes with 4 8-inch strips that are 0.1 ounces each. In terms of money per ounce of weight, this isn't a great deal, but the strips come pre-cut for you, aren't toxic, are thin enough to fit just about any paddle, and if you want less headache, that's probably your best option. Just know that it's not the greatest value on the market. There are 2 primary things you need to be aware of when choosing the correct lead for your paddle. Depending on what paddle you own, you may need to choose a thinner lead tape. Paddles that would fit this category are the Gearbox CX11, Diadem Icon, Pro Kenix Black Ace, and Pro Flight, the Selkirk Vanguard Power Air, or any other 13mm or thinner edgeless paddle. Specifically edgeless paddles, if your paddle has an edge guard, more than likely you can use the thicker, wider lead tape options, but we'll come back to all that in just a minute. The 2 main options you have for lead tape are 1/2 inch and 1/4 inch lead tape. If you use a thinner paddle with no edge guard, you will probably want to purchase the 1/4 inch lead tape. You can still use 1/2 inch, but it might bleed into the face of your paddle and it won't look as clean. The next thing to consider is how much weight the lead tape has per inch. 1/4 inch lead tape comes in 0.25 grams per inch and 0.5 grams per inch. I highly recommend that you choose the heavier option because you will need to use a lot of lead and layering to weight your paddle up with lower weight lead. Even with 0.5 grams per inch, it usually requires very long strips and quite a bit of layering to get a decent amount of weight on your paddle. That issue will only be amplified if you choose the 0.25 grams per inch lead. So I would pretty much forget that the 0.25 grams per inch lead even exists, and if you need that thin of lead tape, opt for the 0.5 grams per inch. For 1/2 inch lead tape, you have 1 gram per inch as well as 2 grams per inch. I prefer the 2 grams per inch tape, but if you want to use longer strips of lead or are okay with layering your lead tape on top of each other, 1 gram is also a good option. I prefer not having to layer several strips of lead in one area, so I always use the heavier option. My recommendation is if you have a paddle with an edge guard, get the 1/2 inch, 2 grams per inch lead tape. If you use a thinner, edgeless paddle, I recommend the 1/4 inch and 0.5 grams per inch or the Selkirk tungsten tape option. There are also pre-cut strips you can purchase, which are a great option for many people because you don't have to measure anything and it's very easy to add to your paddle. In addition, with pre-cut strips, you can know the exact weight of each one, which means you don't need a ruler and scale to measure your lead tape all the time. I highly recommend these if you want to make the lead tape process very simple and cut out a ton of headache. Even for myself recently, this has become one of my favorite ways to use lead because I can be on the court, take one off, put it on. If I don't like it, I can take it off and apply it in a new area. I don't have to bring scissors, a scale, ruler, none of that. So I do highly recommend the pre-cut options. How much lead you should use and where to place it. With lead tape, I recommend adding as much as you can handle before it's too heavy. If you don't know what that weight is for you, start with a higher weight and then tone it down until it feels right for you. I can go up to about 8.7 ounces on most paddles before I start having issues with the weight. It's going to be very different for every individual how much they should add and where. To make it slightly more complicated, 9 ounces between 2 different paddles will feel very different potentially. This is because of something called swing weight. It is essentially what determines where most of the weight is positioned in your paddle, or more simply put, how hard the paddle is to swing through the air. If most of the weight is in the head, it will feel much harder to swing compared to another 9-ounce paddle where all of the weight is in the handle. Swing weight is not something that companies currently offer as a metric on their website, but if you check out my paddle stats spreadsheet in the description down below, I have all of the swing weights listed there, and if you want to filter only by swing weight, you can click the swing weight tab and it will show you all of the options in order. For your reference, most people notice a significant difference between paddles when the number changes by 10 points. So 120 versus 110 will be a very noticeable difference in swing weight. The higher the swing weight is, the harder it will feel to swing. The lower it is, the easier. Or more simply put, the lower the number is, the faster your hands will be, or the higher the number, the slower your hands will be. Now the flip side is, usually the higher the swing weight is, the more the paddle will plow through the ball, and the lower the number is, the less your paddle will plow through the ball. And this can be a small part of the power equation in a paddle. So lower or higher is not necessarily good or bad, it just depends on what the individual wants from their paddle. For your reference, I have found that less than 100 is a crazy low swing weight, and that paddle is going to feel very fast in your hand. 100 to 110 is where a lot of standard shape paddles average and still feels very fast in the hand. 110 to 120 is average for an elongated paddle, and then anything over 120 usually starts to feel quite heavy. The Ben Johns Hyperion CFS 16mm is 127, and I think we can all agree that paddle is very head heavy. I mention all of this because far too often people are hyper focused on the static weight of their paddle. People say things like, I need a 7.8 ounce paddle, 8.1 ounces is just too heavy. More often than not, it's not the weight they're noticing, it's that the 8.1 ounce paddle has more of the weight shifted into the head. I could give that same person a paddle that weighs even more than 8.1 ounces, and they may feel that it's easier to swing than their 7.8 ounce paddle. And that's because of how the weight is distributed. If you want an easy to understand real world application of this, take a hammer and swing it around in your hand. Now flip it upside down and hold the heavy part in your hand and swing it around again. The static weight of the hammer did not change, but it should feel much easier to swing around. This is because the normal way you hold a hammer is very head heavy. Now when you flip it around, it's very head light. The same principles apply to paddles and how the weight is distributed. Now, depending on where you place the lead can also influence the type of characteristics it will enhance on your paddle. There are 3 primary zones you can place your lead: the head, the sides, or the throat. You can technically place it in the handle as well, but more often than not, that does not do what people think it does. But we'll talk more about that in just a minute. If you add lead tape to the head of your paddle, you will add more power and make it harder to swing. If you place it on the sides, you gain some power benefits, but you also add stability to your paddle. This is a great option if you have a paddle that is prone to twisting on off-center shots. It will also usually make the sweet spot feel noticeably larger depending on how much weight you added. The throat of the paddle will also add some stability and give your paddle a more solid feel without increasing your swing weight too much. The benefits you gain from adding the lead at the throat are very similar to the sides, but toned down slightly. So yes, you're gonna make the paddle feel more stable, solid, and increase the sweet spot, but it's just gonna be a little less than when it's at the sides. Now, what I'm about to say for lead in the handle might be counterintuitive to what you've heard from other people say. For example, frequently you'll hear someone say, my paddle was too head heavy, so I put lead in the handle to balance it out. Here's the problem with that statement. There's no scenario where you can add more weight to your paddle and reduce the swing weight of it. It's true that adding weight to the handle will shift the balance lower, but you still have to swing the original head heavy paddle that you had issues with, and now you've added additional weight that you have to swing on top of it. If you want to take this to an extreme example, let's take a Yola Hyperion CFS 16mm that weighs 8.71 ounces. By the logic of adding weight to the handle making it easier to swing, let's add 2 ounces of lead to the handle. Now it's going to be very head light. However, I assure you that the paddle will be even harder to swing because you added a ton of weight to it. I've tried researching this in the tennis world and have not found any examples of someone saying that a stock head-heavy racket became easier to swing because they moved the balance lower. The only way to lower your swing weight is by removing weight, which is unfortunately not easy to do in pickleball. So if a paddle is too hard for you to swing out of the box, there's no scenario where adding more weight will make it easier to swing. However, if you want to increase the static weight of your paddle but not increase the swing weight, the handle is a great place to put lead. If you're looking for a starting recommendation, try the bottom corners or up the sides of your paddle. You'll get a small increase in power and more stability, but you won't make your paddle drastically harder to swing like placing it at the head. Just remember, you're gonna have to experiment with where you place it. every player and paddle is different. Some paddles need the lead placed in different areas and in varying amounts. Experiment with it and don't be afraid to change it if you don't like it. This is especially where the pre-cut strips come in handy because it makes it very easy for you to experiment. Now let's talk about how to weigh your lead and get it on your paddle. Now, I know that may seem like a lot of work, so to help make things easier for you, I've actually made a cheat sheet available for download with the common measurements for lead tape and how much weight you might want to add. Each measurement is for a single strip of lead tape. So if you plan to add weight anywhere other than directly at the top, you will need to use 2 strips. If you want an easy way to figure out how long of strips you need for your paddle when placing it, figure out the maximum amount of weight that you want to add to your paddle. For me, if a paddle is around 8 ounces and has a swing weight below 115, I default to adding anywhere between 0.4 and 0.6 ounces of lead tape. This means that I would need 2 strips of lead that weigh between 0.2 and 0.3 ounces each. You can go to Google and use a grams to ounce converter, so I'll enter 0.6 ounces and this gives me 17 grams. Now I'll divide that by the weight of my lead tape per inch. I use 2 grams per inch lead tape, so it'll be 17 divided by 2, which is 8.5. So this means I need 8.5 inches of lead tape. If you divide that number by 2 again, you'll know how long each strip needs to be for each side of the paddle. In my case, that means each strip needs to be 4.25 inches to be 0.3 ounces each for a total of 0.6 ounces. Once I know the measurements, I take my ruler and measure out 4.25 inches and then cut the lead. I do that for both strips and then place it on my scale to ensure that I'm in the correct ballpark of weight. Once you've got the amount you want, you can peel off the backing of the lead tape and then stick it to the area you want on your paddle. If you want to cover your lead tape so you aren't touching it frequently, you can use electrical tape, gaffer's tape, or my personal favorite, Pro-Lite edge tape. Pro-Lite edge tape is expensive and only fits thicker paddles, but I really like it on my paddles and I found it to be the most durable. Electrical tape is going to be your cheapest option and works just fine for most people. You can also get it in various colors. If you're using a 16mm or thicker paddle, you'll want 3/4 inch electrical tape, and for thinner paddles, you'll want to order 1/2 inch electrical tape. Selkirk and Gearbox also sell thin profile protective tape for their paddles on their website. To apply electrical tape, I start at the throat of the paddle and slowly unwrap the electrical tape and press down as I go around the paddle. If you misplace it, you can pull it up and press it back down without too much adhesion loss. Once I reach the end, I cut it with scissors and then press it down. I recommend taking a credit card or something similar to press down the electrical tape and ensure that it is fully applied to the paddle. All right, that was a lot of information, so let's try and recap it. If you want very little fuss with your lead tape, I recommend buying pre-cut strips that I will have linked in the description. Each weighs 0.1 ounces, so it's very simple to do the math on how much weight you're adding and doesn't involve having to measure and cut lead tape. It's very convenient for messing with different setups on the court. I recommend adding as much weight as you can handle while also maintaining the hand speed that you want. The less weight you add, the less impact it's going to have on the paddle. So if you're expecting a big change, but you only add a small amount of lead tape, that's just what's going to happen. You have to add more tape if you want a big impact. In the description, I will have a PDF cheat sheet with all of the common measurements for cutting your lead and different configurations that you can try for different outcomes. Just know that every paddle needs something different. What I might try on one paddle doesn't necessarily work on another. You need to determine what you think your paddle is missing, which can influence where you place the lead. So there you guys go. That's my lead tape guide. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to click like and subscribe, and I'll catch you in the next one.